Good morning, everyone. Reading this morning is from Colossians chapter 4, from 2 to 6. Devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. And pray for us too, that God may open a door for a message, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And the second reading is from 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you. I grew up in the Presbyterian Church, so I feel very at home. But even still, thank you for the real privilege of coming to share with you on this missions month that you're celebrating. It is awesome to be here, and we look forward to sharing with you some of the things that we've learned and hearing about what God is doing in your midst and in walk with. I have my lovely wife here with me this morning, so please don't feel like everything I say is coming from me. We are a team, have been a team for almost 20 years now. And so a lot of we worked together for all that time. And so a lot of the things that we figure out as we work in ministry is like trying things, discussing things. So everything I say from the front is a real team effort. But if you have a problem with anything, please come and talk to me. And if you like it, it's all my wife. So Lisa and I work for Athletes in Action, which is part of the Tandem Ministries family. Next slide, please. It shows it quite well. The Tandem Ministry changed its name about 8 years ago. It used to be called Campus Crusade for Christ. But that is no longer an appropriate name for a missions organisation in the Western world. So they changed it to Tandem in New Zealand, emphasising the partnership aspect. So there are several ministries within that umbrella. Family Life is there, we're supporting, developing marriages. Student Life is the big ministry on campus, reaching out to students. Work Life is helping people navigate work, stepping into workplace. What does that mean? How can I be a Christian in that space? Love Your Neighbour is a ministry set up to support churches reaching their communities. What does it mean to love your neighbour, as we're called to? Military Life is serving and loving people in the forces. And of course, Athletes in Action is serving and loving athletes, which is where we work. We returned to New Zealand about 2.5 years ago after spending about 17 years in Germany. First in the Black Forest, and then the last 11 of those we were in Berlin. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of what I'd like to share with you this morning, I've got a couple of stories and some pictures about things that we did in Germany, so you can understand a little of the background as I move forward into our texts this morning. So our first picture is a picture of sports camps. When we first went there, these were running, and these were essentially overnight camps. People came from like up to 3 or 4 hours away, would come and spend a week with us playing basketball or soccer. And we would train them in the morning, would play fun activities in the afternoon, and would have in-between times where we'd talk about Jesus. Essentially, the combination of youth sport and faith was what attracted me to the ministry in the first place. These were highly successful because kids would really have a phenomenal spiritual experience over a week, really impactful, but then they would go away, go home, and we wouldn't see them for a year because they lived miles away. So while it was very deep and meaningful, it was the spiritual highlight for the year. And when they reached 15, 16, they either came back as a helper or we didn't see them again. So after a couple of years, we realized the idea is good, but the model needs to change. So the next photo shows our what we moved to, and this is what we called a day camp, partnering with churches around the country, running day camps to reach kids and teenagers in their local area, people that they could see on a regular basis. So this is a camp we did with our church in Berlin. We had all the people in the bluey green t-shirts are the leaders, and all the oranges are the participants. So we would run like 4 different sports over a week, have messages in there, testimonies, and just like fun things in the evening as well, just to have a sprinkling of gospel, a lot of fun, a lot of relationships, with the idea that we could continue to invite them to things, we could continue to connect with them and form ongoing discipleship relationships. Out of the church, I got to know some guys, and we thought we needed to do something. How can guys invite other guys into different things? And guys connect with other guys by getting sweaty and crying together. So this is what we did. We climbed up this mountain in the snow. You can see a bit of snow there, but we're all wearing snowshoes. And we spent 3 days in a hut at about 1,800 meters in the Alps on the border to Austria, which is what you can see there, talking about life, talking about what does it mean to be a guy, what does it mean to be a husband, what does it mean to be a father, and where's God and all that. And one of those guys in the middle there, the short guy, didn't know Jesus at that time, but came to know him through relationships and through things like this. Next picture, please. And then about 5 years ago, there was the great Syrian civil war crisis. And so a lot of refugees fled Syria. Germany opened its borders, and they all came flooding in. And they were all initially just placed in homes with nothing to do. They couldn't go to school because they didn't speak the language. So once a week, we started organising soccer afternoon for them. We would just invite them to come and play some soccer with a couple of German guys, and we had a lot of fun, just getting to know them, teaching them some language, how to survive in Berlin. What does that look like? How do you travel on the underground? How do you buy things? How do you connect with other people? We had a lot of fun. And I actually started teaching them German, which is quite funny. It's like Kiwi teaching guys from Syria German. But they knew nothing, so anything I knew was of immense benefit to them. But we made great friendships with them. A lot of them ended up going to getting involved in different churches and coming to know Jesus through that. But that's just a great way how sport can connect across boundaries like that. Another thing we did is at a more of an elite level was actually inviting an American coach over from the States to come and coach basketball coaches in Berlin. And that was something that they all benefited from, and that was really highly successful. That was mostly at that sort of level. It's a lot of teaching and just a sprinkling of gospel, like a little testimony, and then obviously opportunities to connect with those people further. Now, this next photo is actually moving to New Zealand. When we returned to New Zealand 2.5 years ago, we decided that we'd still be involved in Athletes in Action. We still felt that's where God wanted us to be. So we got involved in the ministry in Auckland here. Lisa and I both work at Massey University and Auckland University, reaching out to athletes there. And one of the things we do, as you can see in this picture, is we connect with students during orientation week. It's the first week of university where students are looking around, which clubs can I get involved with, what are people doing? And this was the March this year. We're giving away an All Blacks jumper that you can see in that picture. Someone gave us a signed All Blacks jumper from last year. So, of course, all these guys wanted it. So we said, fine, you can go in the draw, but you got to fill in the survey. Oh. But that was okay, because the survey was just essentially your opinion on faith and sport. What does that mean? What does it look like? What are your needs? What are you struggling with? What are you good at? And one of the questions on that survey was, would you like to have a chat about Jesus? And some of the people ticked yes. Some of them said no, thank you. And that's fine. The people that said no, we respected that and we left them alone. The people who said yes, we followed up with and we said, you indicated that. What would you like to? And so we connect with them. And this March, we had 800 people do surveys over 3 days. And I think we had about 80 to 100 people say they'd be interested in having a conversation with us. Some people say no, which is quite funny because they're Christians, which is what we're looking for as well, but they say, no, I don't want to talk about Jesus. Either because they think they don't need to, or they're just not interested anymore. So it was actually very insightful information comes out of the survey. But anyway, so we follow up with these 80 people, and some of them are very interested in knowing Jesus on the spot. So we said, okay, we can do that right here and now. And probably about 10 people said yes to starting a relationship with Jesus. And other people say, I'd like to, but I just don't know enough. So we say, well, would you like to explore more about who Jesus is and what he did and what that means? Okay, cool, we can do that. So then we'd set up regular appointments to go through what we call the explore studies. Who was Jesus? What did he do? What did he say? Why is that important? So if you think 800 people did the survey, 10 said yes, and maybe another 10 said, I want more information. That's not that many. But at the same time, God is doing stuff on the universities in New Zealand. And so all the students that we are involved with, we get them into Bible studies, we meet with them every week, we go through some discipleship material. And the people that don't know him are exploring more. We meet with them regularly, generally a one-on-one, and we answer all their questions. And next question, next photo, please. In the middle of this year, we had a big student conference, and there were like 170 students from all of the North Island. And this is our bunch of students, the athletic students, about 40 of them. And at this conference, one of the girls who'd been doing exploring who Jesus was and what that meant for her, she said yes to him finally. So it's a process. People are interested, but it's a process. You need to walk alongside them. And that's a little more of what I'm going to talk about in a minute. Some people say yes straight away, some people say no straight away, and some people just say, I need more information. And that's okay. So when I was thinking and praying about what to share with you this morning, I felt that rather talk about all the things that are happening in Western Europe where we lived, I would share about the lessons that we learnt from there that we are now implementing in New Zealand, and I think are important for us to know as well. So Germany and France and the UK and Spain and Italy are incredibly secular places now. Very secular. The church is there, but it's seen as dead. All these countries, all of Western Europe has a rich Christian heritage, but everybody sees it as their past, not their present, and certainly not their future. And essentially, God has no place in society today. The church is more or less an empty institution, still with a lot of money, but no responsibility, no power, no respect, and no influence. Now, what we probably don't realise is that is our future as well. New Zealand is very quickly heading down the road to secular society, as we see in other parts of the Western world. So the question we'd like to look at this morning is, how can we as Christians and churches get involved, engage in a society that thinks God is irrelevant? Now, Michael Frost wrote a book in 2006 called Exiles. In this book, he proposes that the Western church think of themselves like Israel in exile in Babylon. They were there, they were condoned, they were allowed to worship their own God, they had responsibility of their own affairs, but they still had to obey the laws of the land, and the emperor at that time was king, had the final say. Now, one of the dangers for Israel at that time, and also for us, is the fact is we can look backwards and lament on the fact that society has changed and is no longer the way we want it to be. If we look back 50 years, New Zealand was very much a Christian-orientated society with good values. Now we can look back and go, But if we do that too much, then we actually forget about the fact that God is calling us to be missional people. We are his church. We are sent into the world to be light and salt. Not just looking backwards and saying life was good back then, but also looking forwards and saying, God, what have you got for us? So that's essentially where I'd like to go now. How can we develop a missions mindset while embracing and engaging in a culture that doesn't really want to know Jesus? So two questions, or two ideas. First, how do people come to faith? Because I think once we understand that, that really leads on to the second question is, what can we do? How can I be involved in that? What does that look like for me? What does that look like for us as a church? And these are some of the things that we've been wrestling with and discovering through our time in Western Europe. One of the most helpful books I actually read was a 2008 book called I Once Was Lost by two Americans, Don Everts and Doug Shelp. And in that book, they detail the results of a survey that they did on 2,000 new believers who had said yes to Jesus over the previous 5 years. And they said, great that you know Jesus, but how did that happen? What are the stages you went through? What did your journey look like? Because they wanted to detail it down and understand it so they could portray it in a book for other people to learn and to follow. So they summarize 5 thresholds, as they call them, or invisible boundaries or steps that people go through in their faith journey. So let's talk through those 5. The first one, I think, is the best. From distrust to trust. Every single person who came to know Jesus said it started with knowing a Christian, seeing that they're weird, but they're okay. And that would describe a lot of us, as it describes me. My non-Christian friends think I'm weird, but I'm okay. I can be trusted. And that's where the journey starts, when they see that, okay, you talk about Jesus, you go to church on Sunday, you do some weird things, you pray, but when it comes to trusting you, I can do that. There's something about you that I like. And obviously, we don't know where people are coming from. There's no Bible in schools anymore. And so the generation growing up now that really have no idea about God. They don't know the biblical stories. And so it's not their fault, so to speak. They've just never been told. And living in Berlin, we were surrounded by old communist East Germany, where people thought that God was a Western idea brought in when the wall came down. They don't know the deeper history of Martin Luther and the Reformation in Germany. They just have no idea about God. And so that's becoming more and more prevalent here as well. Or people grow up challenging or being challenged by things that they've experienced in the church as kids, or things that have been told by their parents. So they have a very critical view of church and God. If God existed, why did he allow this to happen? Or I saw this, this happened to me, I can't step foot in a church again. We just have to understand and just accept where people are coming from. It's God working in their lives, not us. And our part is to simply, at first point, is to be a friend. Which also challenges us to be involved in society. Not just to live in society, but which clubs are we involved with? I play basketball in Berlin, and that was my way of really connecting with 20 guys every week from all walks of life. But we would play for an hour and a half, and then on Thursdays we'd go and have a beer after work, after basketball. And we'd just sit down and talk about life. And we had high-flying business people, we had electricians, we had bankers, we had plumbers, we had everything. That didn't matter when you're on the basketball court together. And so that was my place to really engage in society. And then through our kids, and through sports clubs, you meet all these people out there. So think about the areas of society that you're involved with, all the people that you know. And then ask yourself the question, do they really know you? Would they say that they can trust you? Because that's the first step of their journey towards Jesus. The next step is moving from being complacent to being curious. Once they learn to trust you, they think you're weird, but you're okay. And then, but it's just like, okay, that's okay for you, it's not for me. Maybe they answer questions, even spiritual questions, but they have no real interest in reciprocating, no real interest. So this next stage in this faith journey is actually becoming a little more curious about the things they see in your life and hearing these things and wondering what that's all about. The third point is they realize that if they're going to get interested into this God thing, God might challenge them to make some lifestyle changes. And they have to be okay with that before they're going to proceed. And this is actually the longest, probably the most difficult stage of their life. But they have to be, a lot of the time they have no intention to change what seems like a pretty good life. Most people would feel like they're pretty good people, living a pretty good life. It's okay. I don't need to change. I'm not going to change. But as they get to know more about Jesus, they realize that he has the life of abundance in store for him. And eternal life as well. And it's that convinces them, and the Spirit moving in their life that convinces them, actually, I'm willing to learn more about this Jesus guy, and I am willing to open up my life and be open to change, even when that may seem difficult. Fourth point in the journey is, initially they start meandering. And this is, I think, more like a youth group, teenagers at the stage. You have your hardcore group of teenagers that totally follow Jesus, all about knowing him, making him known. And then you've got these other group, a lot of other teenagers on the outside sort of looking in going, yeah, I know you, I'm friends with you, but this Jesus thing, I'm not too sure. They're around, they're involved, they might come to church, but it's just sort of there. And I actually think this encompasses a lot of Christians that we have in New Zealand right now. They're meandering. They know about Jesus. They know about God. They've grown up in the church, or they've just heard about him and like the coffee afterwards. I don't know. But they're meandering. They can't specifically say what their focus is. And in this stage, they actually change from meandering to actually, there's something about Jesus I need to know. There's something about this person that I want. And so they change from just wandering, meandering, or being involved on the outskirts to really seeking more, to actually pursuing him, discovering more, being more intentional. And then the last stage is obviously, in this intentionality, they discover who Jesus is. And they say, I'm willing to change. I'm being called by Jesus. I want to give him my life. I want him to be number one. So these 5 points essentially just describe the stages that people go through from 0 to knowing Jesus personally. And see, it starts with knowing a Christian, which is a challenge to us to be involved in society and to let people to get to know us. And notice that no one said, it doesn't say in here, I went to an Alpha course. That's not bad. Alpha is a great tool, but it's part of the journey. And as you do Alpha yourselves and you think about offering Alpha in the community next year, the people that will come will be the people that know you and trust you. So I would encourage you now to think about, who knows me? Who trusts me? Where am I known? Where am I trusted? And start praying for those people already, because we want God to move in their lives, to nudge them along, to come along. And we want God to nudge them every step of the way, all through 5 steps until they know him personally. So this describes the faith journey, how people come to faith in this postmodern, secular, skeptical age. The survey was done in America, and I would say this is very, very true for Western Europe. And we have made experiences that it's incredibly true for New Zealand too. And I think it's going to become more and more so the case. So bearing all that in mind, so pack that in the back of your mind. Don't forget about it. Just think, okay, we're building on that as we move forward into the second question. How can we play a role? What does that mean for me now? In Warkworth or in the city or wherever you're at. I'm at Massey and Auckland Universities dealing with athletes. We live in Whangaparoa in our street. What does that look like for us? Now that I understand how people walk along this faith journey. Well, firstly, I think the first thing we need to understand is it's a journey. We need to walk alongside people for a long time, and that's okay. We need to be committed to them and committed to praying for them and seeing God work in their lives. So now let's look at our texts for this morning. The first one was Colossians 4, and up here I've broken it into two parts, and you'll see why. This first part, Paul talks about the work of an evangelist. And in the second part, he talks about the work of evangelism. Paul says, pray for us that God would open a door, that I might declare the mystery of Christ. Now, Paul and Timothy and Luke and Mark and other people, they would travel around. They were called to be apostles. They were evangelists. They were traveling around the Mediterranean, planting churches, discipling people in the faith and convincing that Jesus was the Messiah. He is the Lord. Now, everywhere he went, Paul would go to the temple, he'd go to the markets, he'd go anywhere he could talk to people. And he would try and convince them, persuade them that Jesus is the Lord. That is the work of evangelists. So he says, pray for open doors for me, so I might declare the mystery of Christ. And pray for clarity, that whatever context I'm in, whichever culture I'm in, I will find the right words to connect with those people to explain the mystery of Christ. But interesting enough, he doesn't then go on to say, go and do the same thing. He says, I'm an evangelist, that's my role. You are a church, here's what that looks like for you. He says, walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of your time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders. Those would be the people that do not know Jesus. Make the most use of your time. Be intentional. Let your speech be gracious, seasoned with salt. Now, grace is God's unmerited favour. So if our conversation is seasoned with grace, we are blessing people with what we say. We're encouraging, we're loving. Now, I find that easy with my friends in the church because they reciprocate. And we help each other out. But with other people who do not know, like my basketball team in Berlin, who secular people, very critical, don't know how to encourage, don't know how to support or be enthusiastic, it's more difficult to be gracious, to love, to serve, and not expect anything in return. That's what Paul is calling us to love, to be gracious with our words, and also seasoned with salt. Now, I get this because I love baking. And I love cooking. And this morning I made porridge for my boys. And I'm always very aware you've got to put salt in the porridge, otherwise it's completely tasteless. But imagine if one morning I forgot. And I get to the table, here's the porridge, here's breakfast. Oh, I forgot the salt. Well, let me just put it on afterwards. And you dump it on top. It's pretty disgusting. Especially if you're not expecting it. That would be pretty unedible and not very nice at all. And sometimes I think that's how we treat evangelism. We just dump Jesus on top in a big pile afterwards, as an afterthought almost. And it becomes, if it's not expected, it's a bit unedible and not very nice. It doesn't leave a nice taste in your mouth. But Paul is calling us to season our conversation with salt. Salt needs to be mixed into everything, bringing flavour to the whole lot. So every bite is nice. See, when we do that, then it's also noticed when it's not there. So how can we bring Jesus as the salt into our conversation, into our lifestyles? Paul is calling the church in Colossae here to lead tasty, exciting lives that people will actually miss when they're not present. And I believe this is one of the major points that we can be involved in, that we can do to help our friends move along this faith scale as they see something in us, as they see us lead lifestyles that are gracious and salty, intentional. Now, our next verse was 1 Peter 3:15. In your hearts, honour Christ as Lord, or Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defence to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. Gentleness and respect. There's that gracious and salty attitude again. Now, in this verse, Paul is talking a bit more about the how. He says, be prepared to give an answer. Well, if you were to give an answer, someone has to ask you a question. So Peter is challenging us to lead questionable lifestyles, which I did as a teenager, but now I'm called to do it again as an adult, but with a completely different purpose. And that's the very beginning of it. In your heart, honour Christ as Lord. So when Christ is Lord of my life, I will lead a questionable lifestyle. Questionable from the people around me because they're going, you're weird, what are you doing? Why do you live that way? But at the same time, it's like, how do you not buckle under pressure? How do you deal with exams? How do you deal with this? How do you do that? Why is your marriage so good? Why your kids behave? Things that people see in community, in society, as we engage in school and club and sports everywhere. So in this verse as well, Paul is saying, honour Christ the Lord and be prepared. It's emphatic. It's intentional. Now the question is if we live like everybody else, then there won't be any questions. I mean, we drive the same cars, we live in houses that look similar right beside our neighbours. What is it that is going to cause people to question? Because if our lives look exactly the same as everybody else's, there is no need for them to question. Well, there's no difference. So what is it that makes us special? What is it that makes us unique? What is it that makes Mahu Prezi different and called to be here and walk with? So Peter's challenging us to be intentional. And one of the ways that Lisa and I like to talk about that is a thing called love, pray, care. So we're called to love our friends, pray for our friends, the people that we know that we're involved with, the parents of the kids of our friends, or in my basketball team, or whatever. Care for them. Be the love of Jesus to those people. Because chances are, if they know nothing about God, when they think of Jesus, they think of you. You could be the only person in their life that knows Jesus. What a phenomenal privilege to be God to that person, to show them what the love of God looks like. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. And one of this culture really loves stories. Narrative is a major part of postmodern culture. So everybody, especially students, they're all just telling each other stories. Like, how was your weekend? How'd you do? But everything's just stories. So one of the things we encourage people to do is just share little stories, like 20, 30 seconds, about what's Jesus doing. And one of the things I encourage my students to think of is like, be prepared, as it says in this verse. Okay, so Monday morning, what's the first thing anyone's going to ask you? How was your weekend? All right? Be prepared on Monday morning to come up with a tiny little story of what Jesus has done in the past days, week, or whatever. And so one of my students, I was challenging him on this, and he goes, okay, I'll try it. And he says, well, his friends on Monday morning, how was your weekend? Oh, it was good. I went to church and God showed me how selfish I was. You're not selfish. Yes, I am. God showed me I'm incredibly selfish. I just think of myself the whole time. And then he had this argument with his friend. His friend said, you're not selfish. You're the most unselfish person I know. No, God showed me I'm selfish. And so he got them into a phenomenal discussion about how does God speak to us? I am selfish. How people perceive each other. And it was just a very natural way of introducing God into the conversation. So now, Monday mornings, the guy's friends ask him, so what'd you learn at church on Sunday? It doesn't get any better than that, right? You know? And I'll tell you a story about something that happened to us in Berlin. Because one day I was out having lunch on a Friday lunchtime and I lost my wallet. And I had to take off that night because our basketball team was going away for the weekend. So I left about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, Lisa, I've lost my wallet. Let's pray about it. So I prayed about it. I said, Jesus, I really like my wallet back. My life was in that thing. Please, would you bring it back? But then I had to take off. And we were driving about 4 hours. I was in a different city with my entire basketball team of 20 guys. Anyway, Lisa calls me at midnight and says, you'll never guess what happened. I've just got a phone call from this lady who found your wallet. And there's no information in the wallet about phone number or anything, but she found us in the phone book. She called us up and she says, I'm looking for Kevin. Yeah, I'm his wife. Yeah, I've got his wallet. Oh, thank God. Great for that. So anyway, breakfast the next morning, on the Saturday morning, 20 guys, basketball players having breakfast. I say, guys, I just got to tell you the story. I lost my wallet. I prayed about it. I said, Jesus, I'd like it, please. And this lady calls last night and says, I've got it. You can come pick it up. And all the guys, some of them go, one of them said, hallelujah. And another guy said, have you prayed about our games today? You know, so when you share these stories, you get completely different reactions, but that's okay. That's where people are at. But once again, it just came up with the fact Kevin's weird, but God's doing stuff in his life and through him. And so every Thursday night when we sit down for our beer after basketball, they would say, Kev, what's God been doing this week? It gets to the point where they're expecting me to share a story with them each and every week. And it's not a big thing like losing a wallet. It could just be a tiny little thing. Like I had an argument with my wife and I really felt I should pray about it and then go say sorry. And it was all good. Like real stuff, you know, like being authentic and genuine. Little conversations, 20 seconds, but they mean so much to a generation that just has no clue. So leading intentional, questionable lives. I believe that's what we're called to in this society, this culture, now to make a difference as individuals and as a church. And a couple more examples for you. I was talking to a friend of mine at church in Berlin about this whole idea. And one of the things we really like to encourage people to do as people learn to trust you, there's always a time when they come to you and say, actually, you know, I'm going through this or whatever it is. And they've seen something in you, so they've come to you as a person for advice or for care. And we always encourage them, pray with your non-Christian friends. Just really short, like 15 seconds max. Jesus, thank you for this person. Thank you that you love them so much that you want to make a difference in their life. I pray that you've healed the situation. Amen. That's enough. And the amount of people we've seen burst into tears or just say thank you so much, that moved me, it's incredible. Non-Christians are amazed that we would call on the creator of the universe to help them. And they believe in the creator of the universe because they've seen him in your life. They don't know who he is or how to get to him, but that's the next step that comes after that. So anyway, I was talking to a friend of mine at church who's a dentist about this idea of praying for people. And he goes, can I do that? I said, sure you can, just keep it short. He goes, all right, I'll get back to you. So 2 weeks later he comes, Kev, I've got a story for you. So I said, oh, tell me. And so he goes, well, you know, I'm a dentist, I get people in my chair. And I said to this person, can I pray for you? Really excited, you know, he's like, can I pray for you? And this person looks up at him and says, is it really that bad? And he says, no, it's not that bad. It's nothing we can't take care of. But I want, as your dentist, I want to show you how much I care for you as an entire, whole person. And this person just, you know? And so I don't think he offers that to every person. Develops a bit of a trust relationship first. But the amount of phenomenal conversations he's had with people and the things he's seen done in people's lives. And he works in an area of Berlin where there's a very high percentage of Arabic and Turkish immigrants. And he just loves connecting with them because they're very open spiritually as well. And so that's just his way of being a Christian dentist in that place. So, to a society that does not respect the church or know God, Paul and Peter challenge us to live intentional, questionable lives with lifestyles that show who Jesus is, with speech that reveals his grace, and actions that point to a transformed heart ourselves. I have one final example for you, and that is the next picture. I think our lives should be movie trailers. Now, if you watch a movie, we all watch Netflix now, so we don't go to the movies very often, but think back to the last time you went to the movies. Like the 10 minutes before the actual movie starts, they have all these trailers going on. And so when you see a movie trailer, what happens when it finishes? You lean over the person you came with and you either go, no way, or you nudge them and go, we've got to see that. And then you see the movie and you realise all the best bits were in the trailer. And you go, okay. But sometimes you just watch a movie trailer and you go, oh, that looks awesome. I think our lives could be movie trailers. Not just showing the best bits, but pointing towards a creator that loves people through a lifestyle that just gets people attracted and interested in going to the big picture. Amen.